Hey all, today in the last words we're going to be talking about Winchester, the 2018 film directed by the Spierig brothers. So my case here is that Winchester is not as bad as you think or that it's been said to be. It's not great, but it has been kind of just universally panned and just decimated, and I think it's actually a pretty cool modern ghost story. So I'm going to make a case for that. First, a little house cleaning notes. It was released in 2018, directed by the Spierig brothers, who had done Jigsaw, the film in the Saw franchise, just the year before. It's based, of course, on the true story of Sarah Winchester and the Winchester house folklore. I'm not going to get into that too much. I don't claim to be a historian or know much about that. But Sarah Winchester, of course, inherited the Winchester rifle company and apparently had a lot of mental struggles and dealt with that by building this Winchester house, which you can look up, and it's just this crazy actual feat of architecture that existed. And then, of course, there was a lot of stories and folklore attached to that through the years. And this is kind of the first time Hollywood has really tackled it. I'm sure that there are other examples of it coming up, but this is its big budget, feature film introduction kind of to Hollywood horror movies. So it made $46 million at the box office against a $4 million budget. So that's great. Despite all of the bad word of mouth and critical, panning of it, it still seemed to do pretty well. I'd be interested, I should look closer at what the audience score is on Rotten Tomatoes, because on the critic side, it has a 14% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is just, I think, very, very mean and undeserving of what this movie is. It was nominated for several Golden Raspberry Awards, including like Worst Film of the Year. I just don't get it. It's not a great film, but it is by no means that bad. And for making more than 10 times its budget back at the box office, apparently other people liked it enough to go see it, or whatever drove them to see it. But a lot of people saw this movie, so. To jump in, it's an interesting film in part because it's a period piece, of course, so the sets and the costumes are just absolutely outstanding. It's all very authentic. The costume designer, you can tell, put a lot of work into capturing the realities of this time period, and the Winchester house itself being such an amazing architectural feat, to see that recreated in sets is really amazing. And if you watch the making of feature, the special feature, the way they had to maneuver the differences of having these real kind of crazy nonsensical sets, but then still having to fit cameras and lighting equipment and actors and all of this stuff into them, it's really amazing how they pulled it off. And honestly, I can't believe that the film doesn't have more than a $4 million budget when you see all the work that they put into capturing this place and this time period, or the army of artists that had to work on all of that stuff and build and tear down sets. Like $4 million, obviously that's a lot of money, but by Hollywood movie standard, that's hardly anything. So it's amazing that they accomplished what they did. The cinematography is pretty capable for maneuvering those sets and doing, it's not anything too intrusive or really in the forefront, but it does a good job of capturing what it needs to. It makes the most of its Winchester house premise. It's easy to feel, even in the movie, that you are kind of lost in this house and that, you don't ever know what was going to happen one scene to the next, leading from one area to the next, because nothing really makes sense. There's scenes where somebody opens a closet and then somebody opens the other side of the closet, like a door, and there's lots of just weird non-secular things like that where it just kind of throws your brain for a loop, even just watching it in a movie. You can only imagine what it would be like for the characters actually being in this place with dead ends that drop off from the third story or whatever. It does some interesting things as far as trying to have a message. I'm not going to get into it too much, but it does speak very much to gun violence. Of course, from the Winchester perspective, Sarah Winchester was supposedly haunted by all of the people who had died because of the Winchester rifle, and that's something that at least plagued her mental state. And so they really get into that pretty deep in this movie, I think, with the kind of message and meaning of everything going on. The central character has also been a victim of gun violence to some degree, and there's even a pretty controversial scene, I would think, where there's a ghost, before he was a ghost, basically goes on a shooting rampage. So all in the theme of a Winchester rifle, at that time, 1903, I think it is. So it's a little bit different, but you can tell what they're getting at and what the kind of message of the movie is. So it's interesting that it tries. Not every horror movie even tries to address anything like that. So it has some good scares. There's a lot of jump scares. It's a lot of just kind of yelling, jumping, saying boo, but it also has some like cool, creepy images. The kid with the bag on his head, if you've seen the film, there's a few things that kind of stick with me that is just like, you know, unsettling, and it had a good atmosphere to it. Sarah Winchester herself kind of drifting through the house in her long black veil and cloak and stuff while the bells are going off. It has a good amount of scares. It's actually a Hammer film, a Hammer horror film. If you are familiar with the Hammer, you know, films from the 60s, 70s with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and how that brand, you know, was kind of restarted, and it's not the same thing really, but like they started it again under the Hammer horror brand and have been putting out new movies, including, I think it started with The Woman in Black back in 2012 or whenever that was, Daniel Radcliffe. So this is part of that lineage. And it looks like it. I think it kind of feels like a Hammer film in the sense that, you know, there's real kind of deep colors and saturated colors, and, you know, they're creeping around this old dusty, spooky house, and it seems faithful to that lineage. So again, I'm not saying that Winchester is a great film. It's not, you know, certainly not like the best horror film of the year even, but I don't think it deserves the hate that it gets. And it's interesting to see it try a few things that a lot of other movies don't even attempt, and it's a spooky ghost story, which we don't get a lot of from you know, Hollywood level production anymore. Even a lot of the more like supernatural things that we see, you know, they have a more clearly supernatural Lovecraftian kind of bend, whereas this is a pretty traditional ghost story with a haunted house and ghosts. And for that, I enjoyed it. If you haven't watched it because of everything you've heard, I would at least suggest giving it a try. If it's been a while since you've watched it, maybe go back and give it another chance, you know, going into it with a new perspective, because I feel like people on the internet and critics have been pretty unfair to it, and it's not that bad. I liked it fine. So thank you very much. If you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to Something Spooky, and check back for more soon. Thanks.